Welcome to the Policy Circle's Full Circle Leadership Series. My name is Stacy Blakeley, and I am so grateful that you've taken the time to join us today. This series is really designed to dive into the specific skills that we all need to be more effective and impactful leaders. You know, the Policy Circle is a national, nonpartisan nonprofit whose mission is to inform, equip, and connect women so that we can all be more impactful citizens. And we are so grateful for our partners, our collaborators, and specifically the Bowe Stewart Foundation today. They are supporting this endeavor and this initiative. So we're grateful for their partnership because this enables us to reach even more women and give them the skills that they need. We also work with Bowe Stewart Foundation and a number of terrific partners on our civic leadership engagement roadmap. If you're not familiar with our CLEAR program, I encourage you to check this out because it's an opportunity to both learn and take action, which of course we'll be talking about taking action today. But you learn founding principles. It's a 3-month virtual program that is a launching pad for your civic leadership journey. So I encourage you to check it out. And then also these full circle leadership programs, this is our third that we've had this year. We talked about building a compelling case with Vanessa Mendoza and how to secure a state level appointment with Peggy Venable, who heads up appointments in the state of Texas. So check out those programs. There's a link in the chat and you can be both inspired and gain some really practical insight. So we're going to do more of that today, inspiring and then digging into the practicalities and the realities, right, of what it takes to translate something you're passionate about, an issue you care deeply about. How do you translate that into action and legislative change? So we are joined today by two leaders who have done just that. Two women I greatly admire, two women I like to call my friends, and I cannot wait for you to meet them and hear about their journeys and be inspired to go on your own journey to lead really lasting, sustainable, and constructive change. So I think the first thing we're going to do here is introduce these two ladies. So we have got Nicole Nosek. She is the founder and chair of the Texans for Reasonable Solutions, which I love that name. Texas for Reasonable Solutions is focused on solutions to Texas housing crisis. And she previously spent 14 years working in senior roles from co-campaign manager to communications director. And she's really worked at the federal, state, and local level for members of Congress. And she is in the great state of Texas, living in Austin with her husband and 2 kids. So Nicole, I'm delighted to have you here today. I also want to introduce Elizabeth Carlock Phillips. Elizabeth is a fellow Dallasite like myself, another Texan, an impactful social entrepreneur. She is executive director at the Phillips Foundation. And at the foundation, she has really driven a very innovative generational grants program, original programs, impact investing. And alongside her work at the foundation, and part of her foundation work, she champions survivor-led initiatives against child abuse. She advocates for statute of limitations reform and is really exposing the misuse of NDAs. Elizabeth also is a governor appointed, has a role as a trustee at the University of North Carolina. And she resides with her family in Dallas and spends time in Greensboro. So thank you both for joining us today. I'm so excited to engage with two women that I admire so greatly. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having us, Stacy.
I'm so excited to dig in. So I'm going to start with Nicole, and then we're going to bring Elizabeth back on, and then we're going to bring us all together for some conversation at the end. So Nicole, I want to start with you. What sparked your interest in public policy? And I'm always kind of fascinated to hear a little bit about your journey from California to Texas. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I really started when I was working as a paralegal in California. And like many Americans, you don't want to spend an hour to 2 hours driving to work every day. And so what I noticed was that even though I was working my butt off and I was working probably 45, 50 hours a week, making just below $50,000, my living conditions felt like I was making much less. I was living in a 3-bedroom apartment. There was another young professional in the second room, but there was also in the third room, there was a little family with a baby. And I thought, if this is as far away from the American dream as you can get, I don't know what is. And so it really led me to look down the rabbit hole of what I call land use. And as I started getting involved and volunteering with local groups, I noticed that there was always just a few folks who would show up to city council and protest adding another story to someone else's house down the street that would completely ruin the entire street, as if that was their property to make that decision with. And it was such an interesting aha moment that it became clear that if I was being affected and I was living in these conditions and I was making just below 50K, what about your teacher? What about your teacher's assistant? What about your Uber driver? What about the barista just around the corner? And even though it's easy for legislators to get caught up in some of these bigger jobs or like innovative jobs, but a lot of those folks are the crux of this community. And if you don't have nannies or teachers or baristas there to help move things along, what will our society become?
Well, and when you were in California, I think you had shared with me before, you started to realize you didn't feel like people actually wanted to solve the problem. And so talk to me a little bit about that, what you started seeing as really a lot of talk and not a lot of action.
Well, it's so fascinating because if you look at there was laws created in the 1960s, both in California and ironically in Texas, and the laws look very similar. And what you'll notice was that the group that I was involved with, I'm really proud of what they ended up accomplishing after I left, to be clear. I don't want to take credit where it's not due. But they ended up putting teeth into the law, and they started starting a program where they actually ended up suing cities that weren't building enough housing that was on par with the growth. And what was fascinating was that some of the cities actually started, in order to prevent themselves from being sued, they started walking around and asking different homeowners, would you be willing in a theoretical world to build a house in your backyard, like an accessory dwelling unit? And if they said yes, they would count that towards, okay, there's going to be a house built, so we don't have to comply by this law.
Wow. Okay.
I know it's quite technical, but it was very interesting how certain legislators and certain folks, they don't see in the short term, they get bothered by adding another accessory dwelling unit down the road or adding a duplex down the road. But in the long term, what this does to the fabric of their society, in Utah, when they ended up tackling this issue, the Utah governor would ask folks, do you want your kids to live with you or do you want them to live close to you? Because that's ultimately what you're looking at when over 70% of millennials cannot afford a home.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. And I think one that we all should be asking ourselves. So you've moved to Texas. What struck you as disturbing, alarming, created a sense of urgency in you to found your organization and start plowing into this issue in Texas?
So there were some great groups, and I volunteered with some of the groups that were trying to pass meaningful common sense reforms. And sometimes they did pass those reforms. And as soon as they would pass them, there's ongoing lawsuits, and there tend to be the same 20 homeowners who sue the city into sort of a status of not implementing those laws. So it gets caught up in courts. And I thought, if this is what democracy is supposed to look like, I don't know what our American democracy is coming to when there's 20 people that are determining the housing policy that the city that we're living in has come to. So I ended up getting involved with them, and I saw, I think we have to go to the state and take a more holistic perspective on this. And if they go to those same 20 homeowners, unsurprisingly, they did go and testify against our bills at the state, but they can't go and sue the laws that we passed out of existence. They can try, but I think it's going to be much less effective than the tools that they used here at the city. Ironically, some of the folks who helped me in the city saw how meaningful and important it was. So even though there oftentimes is this tension between cities and state power, a lot of folks in the city, even in city departments across the state of Texas, and I'm not going to say which, were supportive of our efforts personally. I'm not saying they helped me, but they were supportive of our efforts personally because they saw what Texas land policy would be if we kept going in this direction.
Well, and I think that's so interesting. And we're going to circle back around to this, right? Because dealing with opposition is a big piece, right, of the work that you and Elizabeth are both doing. So I want to bring Elizabeth on. And Elizabeth, I think it'd be so helpful if you sort of laid some groundwork. Tell us about your foundation and what has sort of led you to now a policy focus.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I love hearing from Nicole, and I also love Texas for Reasonable Solutions. What a great title for that. We need reasonable solutions. So I started serving as the executive director of the Phillips Foundation about a decade ago. It was endowed by my husband's grandfather, and we early on set our focus to be a catalytic capital platform. So we seek out opportunities. We're issue agnostic on what thematic areas we address, but just look for opportunities where creative financing and catalytic capital can make a difference, can prove a concept, can spark innovation or scale what works. So that led us into work around chronic homelessness, foster youth who age out of the system. And when we were able to provide data around addressing those issues in private philanthropy, get the results on, by this investment, it saves taxpayers this amount of dollars, and go take it to the state for scaling. That's when we realized this is such a unique role of philanthropy that I think often the field misses. But the government cannot be innovative because that requires gambling with taxpayer dollars. So that's our role as institutional philanthropy, to be that risk capital. So as we experienced that and worked with great organizations who sometimes had advocacy departments, other times would hire lobbyists to help push the information to the North Carolina legislature, we learned a lot of lessons. And I realized the power of providing that data and doing some of the legwork before you bring it to legislators. They're expected to be experts on so many topics. It's just impossible. There aren't enough hours in a day. So getting that data aggregated and presentable really created that traction. So we learned a lot in that process. Then also, on a personal side, my family had a tragedy. My late brother was a victim of sexual abuse at Kanakuk camps, a mega camp in Southwest Missouri. And I was able to use some of the lessons I have learned professionally to look at what happened there and to say, we need to make change. And so that's what led me into working in Texas. The Phillips Foundation originally was headquartered in Greensboro, North Carolina, but we opened an office here in Dallas about 6 years ago. And so now working in Austin with a coalition of people who care about child sexual abuse prevention, statute of limitations reform, making youth stewarding organizations like camps and schools safer for children. And because I have a personal story, I've seen it be very effective compared to just coming at it from a professional angle. I know we'll talk more about that.
Yeah. And, something you had said to me that I found particularly compelling was the proximity, right? When you've got the pain, really, that's kind of rooted in the proximity, it sort of drives you differently in how you approach these issues. Talk a little bit about that, because you and I have said, like, you can look at policies across the board, organizations that were developed. Well, it came out of proximity, right, to a challenge, a tragedy. Talk about how that proximity is a driver.
Yes, I think it's so key that we get proximate to the issues we're trying to address. Sometimes that happens out of tragedy. Other times it happens from experience in a particular field. But especially elected legislators, they want to hear from their constituents what matters to them. It could be an advocacy organization that, as I mentioned earlier, aggregated the data, or it could be something personable, like what I was describing. And as I started to dig into this issue of child sexual abuse and youth stewarding organizations, I came to realize that 18 states in this country don't require criminal background checks on summer camp counselors. I mean, come on, that seems so intuitive. And I think parents assume that safety measures that are just a baseline like that they already exist, and they don't. And so legislators are often appalled to find this out. It's not something they've necessarily dug into, but if a constituent has had an experience, a tragedy, or understands an issue, they want those facts, they want that data, and they want constituents, especially survivor voices, to be a part of the conversation.
That's so, I mean, I think you're right. You're bringing something to their attention because they have a limited, right, amount of resources and attention. So what are some of the biggest challenges, maybe some surprises you've had in working directly with legislators? Obviously, you've got a broad amount of experience on this, but what do you think is one of the bigger challenges?
I think finding the right champions. Everyone has their own agendas and their own personal issues, right? And so finding legislators whose passion areas and who understand the issue you care about is so key. And then also being realistic about the strategy component and bringing in the right subject matter experts, the right survivor voices in order to build a coalition, to testify at these hearings. It's so important that you find the right allies and champions and build a strategy in the interim so that when the legislature's in session, you can press go and you know who your people are.
Oh, that's so good. Let's bring Nicole back because she pressed go. And I mean, Nicole, you hit this last legislative session. I mean, I say you're one of my heat-seeking missile friends, right? Because you got it and you went after it. Talk to us about that experience, like the groundwork you had to lay, right? And then so you were ready to go. And then what did it look like? Because you were working it. I think you were working it with a little baby too. Talk to us about that experience of getting ready and then really advocating for the very practical policy changes that you were trying to work on in this last session in Texas.
No, thank you for that, Stacy. I mean, I'm equally surprised the amount of events that you guys host, or you ladies host, that are so geared towards really making it so women step up into their full potential, because we've got a lot to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd also like to say, Elizabeth, you know, I've got 2 toddlers, which makes this, it's forced me to be a true manager of time, but I so appreciate the work that you're doing, because hopefully my kids never have to experience that. And I know there's orgs like yours that are very effective, that are setting the playing field so that there doesn't have to be that harm that kids experience at a young age. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing. So Stacy, you asked me how exactly did we do this? I brought together a large stakeholder of groups of folks that I knew that would resonate from everybody across the aisle. And I really wanted to make sure that summer before there was interim charges. What does interim charge sound like? It sounds like the word is confusing. It sounds like some weird legal document that nobody knows about. They're basically these hearings that happen about a year, I would say 9 months before the actual session starts. And oftentimes those hearings are put out calls for, okay, here's some issues that we're looking at. We're going to have the key senators, we're going to have the key representatives listening, because they want to hear what are stakeholders talking about, what kind of bills do they want to hear get passed. So we made sure that the stakeholder groups that we had appealed to both the Republicans and the Democrats on that group. We had some groups that were environmental orgs that went up and testified about how some of the minimum lot size requirements, which if you have a smaller lot, it's much cheaper, as you could imagine. And then we also had builders from Austin tell what were their true victim stories. And we were lucky because Senator Betancourt, who's a very well-respected senator out of the Houston area, when one of those builders came up, he was red in the face when he heard about these stories of the turnaround from the city that the builder had experienced. And this builder, this builder runs probably a 30-man company with he and his wife. So once again, it was putting a small business entrepreneur in front of a well-respected Republican to have him tell his story about, while he's trying to make a livelihood for he and his family, the type of hoops that he has to jump through. One of the stories he told me, and these are the types of things that are great to bring to interim charge hearings was how the city demanded that in order for them to give them the permit for something he was building on the lake here in Lake Austin, which is prime property, he needed to make sure that he gave 30% of the land to the city in order for them to give him the permit. I mean, if this doesn't sound like a corrupt Ponzi scheme, I don't know what does.
Oh my gosh.
So it's stories like that people could relate to it. And while there's a lot of wonky language that you have to use with land use and housing, a lot of these stories boil down to, oh my gosh, did you hear about something that was so unjust or unfair? One of the other stories that we had somebody write in an op-ed, they're actually ready to testify, but because she was a teacher, she wasn't able to stay the full 8 hours to testify. It was actually one of my kids' preschool teacher who was in her mid-20s. She was a single mom. She was an amazing preschool teacher. And she had to drive up to 1 hour to get to work and back. And she had to live in an RV in her parents' backyard. And she had a young son. And when you hear these stories of working class individuals, whether you're on the left or whether you're on the right, if you have any semblance of the American dream or sanity, you want to help solve these issues. So I think it's really bringing in stakeholders from all across the aisle who can really talk to each side, so it doesn't just become a one-sided issue.
I think that is so important. And the power of stories, right? We can't discount the importance of the storytelling and then identifying, right? The right people to tell the right story to the right audience and the timing. I love that you shared all that with us, Nicole. We're going to come back to that in a second because I want Elizabeth, with me, Elizabeth, and you had some interesting, I think, experiences in Missouri as you tackled this issue. What kind of surprised you in that process? And then how did you really go about, because you had to really have champions and, I think you had some real opportunities and challenges there. What did that look like to you in Missouri?
Yeah, so every state is different, right? And the work we're doing in Missouri looks very different from the work we're doing in Texas. But what happened in Missouri, it was survivor-led. Again, those stories that Nicole was talking about that you just mentioned, those are the most powerful way to get legislators' attention on something. And there was a House member representing Taney County, Missouri, which is where Kanakuk Camps is located, that's had this decades-long sex abuse problem. And he was reading survivors' voices in the press about the Kanakuk abuse. And it moved him to file a bill to change the statute of limitations for child sexual abuse and trafficking victims in Missouri. And so he came to the table with this bill. Then we brought in Child U.S. Advocacy, which is the national leader in the statute of limitations reform work. They have a map on their website that shows you state by state and provides scorecards as to who gets an A on this issue, all the way to who's failing and needs change urgently. Missouri was more on the failing side. In Missouri, you can only file against a non-perpetrator institution up until the age of 26 and a direct perpetrator up until age 31. That's problematic because what we now know is that the average age of disclosure for child sexual abuse victims is 52. And it's later for males typically than female victims. And so when Representative Seitz, who championed this legislation out of Taney County, and he found a Senate champion as well, who was really vocal and a great advocate for us, and they were co-sponsors of this bill on both sides of the aisle, when he brought it forward and said, Missouri, we have a problem, and we are burying the opportunities for these victims to have justice, it really got the attention of both sides of the aisle, who can say that kids who are abused should not have access to the justice system. Mm-hmm. We are up against, though, insurance companies and Catholic Church lobbyists, Boy Scouts of America lobbyists, who do not want to see the statute of limitations extended. They do not want to see these statute of limitations revival windows that we've now seen in states like Louisiana, New York, Maryland recently passed an amazing reform bill on this issue. And we also, because of the testimony of Kanakuk survivors, were able to bring forward the issue of NDAs and how they are misused against child sexual abuse victims to achieve quick settlements. And in some cases, if the victim's a minor, their parents are signing these settlements with non-disclosure clauses or non-disparagement clauses. And the child's voice is signed away without their consent. They are minors. And that really resonated with legislators as well. And so we were successful in getting a unanimous vote out of the Missouri House Judiciary Committee this last session. We got a unanimous vote on the House floor. It was too late in the session to get it to the Senate floor. So we had some big wins, but the work is not done. So we will build on that momentum in the interim and continue to build the coalition and the champions on both sides in Missouri next session.
Next session. Okay, that is a great chance for us to bring Nicole back because you bring up the word next session. Something that I think we talk about a lot at the policy circle, I think I might have mentioned this to you too, Elizabeth, is, this is a long game. Right? This is not, I'm going to show up, I'm going to win and go home and have a glass of champagne, call it a day. This is hard work. It requires a lot of patience and persistence, which both of you have shown. And I think you both have touched on this, but I think this would be a really great opportunity for you guys to share. How did you go about sort of building your coalition? Because I know you're strategic about it, right? But I think it'd be great, like for Nicole, for you to start, like how do you put together a coalition? And then I want Elizabeth for you to chime in too, because this is such a key part, right, of having some people that are going to go the long haul with you, because it's not overnight. So Nicole, how would you go about building your coalitions?
Yeah, so I think this is probably one of, if I had one takeaway for everyone, it would be this. Surround yourself with people that know way more about the issue than yourself. And if you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably in the wrong room. I mean that because we did probably 5 to 6 different research meetings where it was fascinating. It was architects, it was affordable housing developers, it was nonprofits who were focused on housing, even some environmental groups who had been involved in housing policy before that were throwing ideas on the wall of what about this housing idea? How are we going to measure all of these when we look at what's passable in Texas and also what's going to move the needle? Because what you'll see from some orgs is there's a lot of PR bills. They sound great, they look great, politicians hold it up, but there's no real opposition because you're not moving the needle. So we're looking at those two metrics. And in those meetings, I made sure that we strategically had folks that were going to invest time in helping us with craft these bills. And then those same folks could turn around and help talk to different legislators. We're really lucky to have folks like Texas Public Policy Foundation, who really went to bat, James Quintero, in specific. They have great relationships with the Senate, great relationships with the Lieutenant Governor. We had folks like the Texas Conservative Coalition Research Institute, who would also send daily emails during the heat of the ledge session about which legislators should vote for what. And then we also had folks on the left where even though Habitat for Humanity is nonpartisan, it was really helpful to have those Habitat for Humanity folks go in and talk to Democratic leaders. So we really made sure that we built out a group that could talk to different folks. Now we ended up getting one bill passed, and our second bill lost by 2 votes. So it lost 68 to 70, made it through every single chamber. And right before it went to the governor's desk, if we'd had one of those votes that flipped, I'm confident that we could have gotten it there. So I think where we screwed up a bit is we needed to talk more with Democrats about how there are Democrat cities who have implemented a lot of these policies and they worked. There are also Republican cities who also implemented a lot of these policies and worked. I think that the housing issue is just so bad that it's omnipartisan, because whether you're Republican or Democrat, your kid or your family or you yourself are struggling with this housing affordability crisis.
I think that's so interesting too. If you think about, Elizabeth, the issue, right, that we're talking about, you've tackled many, but the one that you're really focused on, this does sort of cross, right? You get across that partisan, there's always partisanship, let's all be honest, right? But you start to cross over that because you are talking about children and safety. How did you go about, and then what are you doing now to build strong coalitions that are going to help you move the ball down the field?
Yeah, what you both just said is exactly right. And that coalition strategy is so important, especially that you agree on non-negotiables, because so often a bill will be brought forward and it gets watered down in one of the two, in the bicameral legislature. And so you have to go in with, this is our bottom line, the bare bones bill that we will accept. And so in the state of Texas, for example, it's important to involve advocacy organizations that work with child advocacy centers, or we worked with a lot of Boy Scout survivors, not just camp survivors, but finding your people may have different stories than you, but they touch this issue as well. And their stories are really powerful. So assemble your army first and foremost. And that's individuals, that's survivors, but it's also advocacy organizations. And in Missouri, different than Texas, we were really in lockstep with the Missouri Association of Trial Attorneys. That strategy would not necessarily work in Texas. It's a different stigma on trial attorneys pushing for something in Texas than it is in Missouri. They're both Republican states, but you have to read the room and say, is this the right partner in this state? And partnering with national organizations, like, as I mentioned, Child US Advocacy is so crucial because they have had success in over 25 states. So they can tell you, these are the different ways to go about this. This is what worked here. This is what worked there. And it gets you a lot further, a lot faster when you have those allies speaking into the strategy.
I love that you bring that up. I mean, that's part of the beauty that we found with our CLEAR program, right? Is because it's 30 women gathered from all over the country, and we don't always have to reinvent the wheel, right? It's so valuable to see what's worked in other states. And I'm sure that, I've talked about this individually with both of you, casting that wider net, right? So you can understand best practices, I think is key. I want to delve into one practical issue and then a little personal side I want to ask you both about. On the practical side, can you just give us a little glimpse? You don't have to lay it all out, but what was the power of like PR and grassroots in your endeavors? Because I've heard about that from you both in different areas. Elizabeth, how did you guys leverage, your public relations and groundswell of support to help you?
Yeah, so working with child sexual abuse survivors, it's their worst trauma. It is sensitive, and it is not healing for every victim and survivor to tell their story publicly. For others, it is the most healing thing, and it's something they want to do. And so depending on how they want to leverage their voices, there are so many different ways to help. But leveraging the press is certainly one, especially when there are lawsuits filed or when there's an incident that's making something known through a Netflix documentary and getting that public awareness. That can be so huge, and it can push something across the finish line because the public is now engaged, and it's not just those people who have proximity to an issue calling and pushing their legislators, but the general public is now engaged. So I think it's a crucial part of the strategy.
Nicole?
I totally agree with what Elizabeth mentioned. I'd love to discuss a story here that kind of illuminates the importance of grassroots. There was a senator who is relevant, or who has been in politics for a long time in Texas, and many of the folks that I know said, don't even try to work on that senator. That senator is going to vote against you, and just spend your time on other people that are actually flippable. And this was at the beginning of ledge session. And I thought, I want to test out some messaging and test out some strategies, because it is, whether we're able to flip her or even get her to see a little bit more eye to eye, that's going to be almost like a test case that then we can use for other legislators. So she had a coffee where all the public was invited. And we went ahead and tapped on our coalition to go. We had 3 university students. We brought Habitat for Humanity there. We also had a small business owner, and we had about 2 other groups, one of which was an environmental group, and myself. And they all asked questions. Of the maybe 10 questions that were asked, at least 6 of them were about housing affordability. What do you plan on doing about housing affordability? And at the end, she was asking to take a picture with the University of Texas students to post on her social media. And those students were directly struggling with housing affordability. I mean, that's such that's such an issue that directly affects students, senior citizens. And what do you know? We went into that next ledge session, and she ended up voting for 2 out of our 3 major bills, yes. And so it was interesting to me to find these opportunities to pull on your grassroots, because yes, you do have associations, and we had really amazing associations that helped us with bill language and helped us pull things through, whether it was the Association of Builders, who are really amazing, or the realtors. But having these individual stories of people who are coming out because, gosh damn it, this is an important issue.
Well, you know what, Nicole, I think what's interesting in this is there's so many different approaches, right? From social media to showing up. But I think a big piece of this is showing up, right? And being strategic about who you bring into the mix. I want to shift from practical to personal, because you are both some of the busiest women I know, which is always like, you want something done, ask a busy woman, which is great. But you also have a lot of other things on your plate. You both have young children. And I think we encounter a lot of folks, right, where they're concerned they don't have time. Resources is obviously a challenge for many people, but it's also, how do you balance these out, right? Because you have a lot of competing things going on in your life, but you've made this a priority. Talk to me about the choices you have to make, maybe some of the sacrifices. Elizabeth, I'll start with you, and some advice you have for women that are trying to figure out, okay, how do I fit something that really matters to me into my already busy life?
Yeah, it just comes down to priorities. And I have 3 children. They're 11, 8, and 5. And my family is definitely my first priority, my husband and kids. But I'm doing this work for them, for my children, for the next generation. And I talk to them about my work. And so they know why mommy has to go to Austin tomorrow, or Jefferson City, Missouri. And they're aware of how important this is. And it's been an amazing family journey. I would also say just having a support system around you, whether that's family, friends, great therapists. It's so important to have that scaffolding, because this is really hard work and it is a long game. You know, as Nicole and I have both said, you don't get everything through the first go around. There are some early wins, and then there's some things that take several sessions. And so it's important to have that mindset and to be realistic, to protect your peace in the process, and just being surrounded by like-minded individuals.
Protect your peace. That's good. Nicole?
I was writing down notes as Elizabeth was talking. I think it's always a process, but I've really found that allocating, okay, I've got this amount of hours per day that I want to put towards something. So maybe for folks that are viewers or listeners, maybe it's 2 hours a day, maybe it's 30 minutes, but I promise you, if you use that 30 minutes towards something that you're passionate about, which, by the way, a lot of folks always ask, well, what do? I don't know what to do. Well, what is the biggest problem that really bothers you? And then go from there and exploring solutions, Googling, talking to experts. But even if you take a half hour every day where you're like, I'm going to do something, I'm going to go deep on this societal issue that I really care about, or this nonprofit that means a lot for me, you'd be surprised that half hour over a month's time, you're getting somewhere. So I would say take the time that you have and fit the work into that time, because you don't need to do everything within 1 week's time. It could be something that takes 6 weeks. And that way you're not struggling with burnout.
Oh, I think that's such a good idea. And, of course, I would have a shameless plug in that the Policy Circle, we are designed to help you find your passion, your focus, and your people, right? Because this is a key factor, I think both of you touch on. It's like who you surround yourself with. Are you with people that are just going to fuss? Are you going to be with people that want to do something about it? And I just think that is such a critical differentiator I've seen in both of you, and that I see in our community. And I'm just going to tell you, I am inspired And you're right. It's like that, the atomic habits, right? Spend 30 minutes, spend 10 minutes. But we would say, read briefs is one of the things we're going to suggest to you. We have 70 briefs in our library. If there's a topic you care about, we're probably covering it. And if we don't, you need to reach out to us, because we want to be responsive to the things that, like, that Elizabeth, Nicole, our members, our friends care about. And so I am super excited for us to not only have the folks that are on this call today to be inspired and to take action, but I encourage everybody that's listening today, this will be recorded. Share it with your friends, share it with your network, and then find some other people, right, that are going to walk alongside you and start a policy circle on an issue. We have women that have started it about a particular issue, and then they just dig in and dig in and dig in and then go do the work together. So that's my shameless plug to layer in the amazing advice that we have from Elizabeth and Nicole. And I would encourage you all to follow them, to learn more about their work. I guarantee you, if it's something, we've already got somebody in the chat, Elizabeth, that's like, I want to go to, to work on this issue in Missouri. So please, if you are passionate about the same issues that Nicole and Elizabeth are, reach out. We will connect you to them and to the amazing work that we're doing. And I think at this point, we're going to wrap. And I'm going to tell you, Elizabeth and Nicole, I could talk to y'all all day. And we've got some great questions. And so I may be shooting y'all some questions so we can do continued follow-up on social media. But thanks for everything that you're doing. And we're just really grateful to have you as part of our community, leading by doing. So thank you.
Thank you. And please join us. This was great. Thanks, Stacy.
Awesome.
And Stacy, right back at you. I mean,
yes,
I think there's a lot of folks who really want to get involved and they just don't know how to do it. So I think, when I realized what the Policy Circle was doing, I was like, that's such a unique organization that fulfills such an important need. And I think for a lot of the folks that took time out of their day to take the first step to figure out what the heck do I want to do in order to start making the changes that I want to see in the world.
Yeah. And I'm not a lawyer. I have no background in child psychology. It doesn't matter what your degree is. If you care about an issue, then you can tackle it with the help of organizations like the Policy Circle and the sisterhood that it has built. So thank you again.
Love that finish, everybody. Thank you both. And I'm just going to wrap us up here today with just a few quick notes, everybody. We are, again, so grateful for all the time that you spent, for your thoughtful questions that we've worked into this. Again, I'd love for you to look at our civic leadership engagement roadmap. Check out CLEAR. It's a great place to start, to build your peer group, and to really get in and understand the issues you care about and how you can take action. So we have 2 tracks. We have CLEAR 1.0 and 2.0. We offer these throughout the year. We also have a track focused on education, which is CLEAR 3.0. So if that's something that you're super interested in, we would love for you to dive in. You can apply. We're happy to answer more questions about that. And again, I want to say, if the work we're doing speaks to you, if you want to be part of, I love Elizabeth, kind of this sisterhood of change makers who want to be more informed, who want to have access to all of our briefs, who want to host circles of conversation, really just start to engage in civic renewal. Boy, we want you to be part of it. So you can click on the links in the chat. You can go to our website, but we really hope that you'll join us. You'll subscribe to our newsletter. You'll spread the word and help us have an even bigger impact all around the country. So I'm inspired, feeling a little challenged. I hope you are too. And I hope you have a terrific rest of your day. Thanks.